Hi again, this is Dan Hickey. This is one of a series of short videos concerning assessment practices, principles, and policies. Today we're going to talk about one principle in assessment, a very important principle known as assessment bias. What we want to achieve in assessment is really the absence of bias. So there's really two forms of bias that you will probably find yourself concerned with. These are offensiveness and unfair penalization. Offensiveness occurs when the content of an item or an assessment is offensive to a subgroup of students. Because most major test developers carefully analyze their test items, this is not really a common problem in standardized tests. However, offensiveness often creeps into instructor-developed classroom assessments. Even when instructors try to avoid offensive items, every now and then an offensive item may appear. Try to avoid stereotypes regarding gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or any such variables in your assessments. This is, of course, going to be a bigger problem in some domains than others. Unfair penalization occurs when the content of a test item disadvantages a student who is a member of a subgroup. This bias is more common in classroom assessments than offensive items because it's so much harder to detect. An example would be using a common American fable on a reading comprehension test that is given to US-born students and newly arrived international students. Because the fable is unfamiliar to the international students, it unfairly penalizes them. This can also happen when some students have been more directly exposed to the content of an assessment than other students, but this actually falls under a separate topic known as validity, which I'll discuss in a different video. Another really important issue concerns disparate impact. This refers to the occasion when different ethnic groups perform better or worse on a particular assessment, typically in the context of standardized achievement tests. When this happens, there might or might not be bias, but when it occurs, it's worthy of a close examination. Differential item functioning is a psychometric technique used to detect whether a particular item is behaving in unexpected ways for a particular subgroup of students relative to the entire set of items. While disparate impact remains a controversial topic, widespread use of DIF has allowed standardized test makers to identify and remove specific items that subgroups perform poorly on relative to the rest of the items. Instructors and administrators can use the 3 steps in the judgmental approach to identify and eliminate bias in assessments. These steps are usually taken for high-stakes assessments, but you can also use them in classroom settings as well. The first step is to assemble a bias review panel. For high-stakes testing, this might involve as many as 25 reviewers who all know the content of the assessment but come from a mix of gender and ethnic backgrounds. For lower-stakes classroom assessments, the panel can be much smaller. The panel members examine each item in the assessment and ask the question, might this item offend or unfairly penalize any group of students on the basis of personal characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, religion, or race? Finally, the panel makes an overall absence of bias judgment. Here, the panel members look at the items in the aggregate or as a whole, and again, they ask the question, considering all of the items in the device you just reviewed, do the items taken as a whole offend or unfairly penalize any group of students on the basis of personal characteristics? Bias detection can be scaled up or scaled down depending on the needs. When there are large numbers of students involved, judgmental approaches can be scaled up and usually will also involve psychometric approaches as well. When there are smaller numbers of students involved, the judgmental approach can be scaled down even to the level of simply increasing awareness by the classroom instructor for all of the assessments used in the class, and also not just thinking about paper and pencil assessments, but other informal assessments as well. The important thing is to take some time looking at the assessment items and the assessments you carry out to search for sources of bias. 2 additional areas of consideration concern students with disabilities and English language learners. These are very important issues, and there's lots of rules and regulations associated with them. I'm not going to discuss them in depth because, frankly, they're quite specific and because I'm not a specialist in these issues. As for disabilities, in most countries, in both K-12 settings and universities, educators are required to make accommodations during testing for students with disabilities that are relevant to that assessment act. If you're an administrator or if you have students with disabilities in your classrooms, you really need to be knowledgeable. if you want to claim to be an expert in assessment about this important issue. Remember, different disabilities call for different accommodations. The second type of consideration is for non-native speakers. If you're testing content knowledge, such as in mathematics, but you're using word problems, your assessments might be a lot harder for students who are being tested in their second or third language. Again, this varies a great deal by level and context. If you have non-native speakers, particularly if your tests are high stakes, you should develop significant expertise in this regard. Let me wrap up with some opinions of my own in this regard. Over the years, I've had a few students in my class argue that this is really just about being overly sensitive, about being, quote, politically correct. And that's simply not the case. It's really about fairness, plain and simple. People have lots of opinions and there's lots of debates about how culturally relevant curriculum should be. In my opinion, these are important discussions to have. You can avoid many problems by having clear curricular aims and then making sure that your assessments target those aims without offending anyone or unfairly penalizing students. And whatever you do, avoid falling into the trap of only worrying about the subgroups of students that you assume you have in your class. That's all for now on the topic of bias. There's lots more to be learned, but remember the important thing is to look carefully at your items and consider whether or not they're offensive. It just takes time and you have to be careful. Bye now.